Okay, folks, so this is a sample assignment 2 project. You'll see that this first part here is the research proposal, right? But what we're actually looking at today is how to do an annotated bibliography. So the first thing that I want you to just see is just look at the format, all right? It says annotated bibliography right here, and you see that there's a citation, right? And then there are 2 to 3 paragraphs underneath of that describe that source, all right? Mine actually ends up having a little bit more sources than you need, just because I wanted to give you some examples of that. But today we're actually going to talk about how to write an annotated bibliography entry, and for that reason, I want us to look at something that we have already read together, which is Tobin et al.'s Images of Gender, Race, Age, and Orientation in Disney Films, right? So here's the deal, friends. There are actually 3 parts to an annotated bibliography. The first part is that you want to identify the author's central argument or thesis, right? And so I want you to take a look at how I've done this right here. Tobin et al. Argue that because Disney is such a powerful media company, parents and other adults need to pay attention to the messages Disney's film teach about different social groups, etc. Right? So that is the thesis for the piece. The next thing that you are going to do is a tiny bit more complicated, but basically you're identifying the author's claim and the author's evidence to support those claims, right? Because a thesis is a central argument. Claims are smaller things that build up an argument, all right? So you can see that the first claim, so Tobin et al., right, claim that Latinx people are often represented in a negative light. So that's the claim, but then how do they back it up with pieces of evidence, right? And here you see they later substantiate this claim in their analysis of the Chihuahua character Tito and Oliver, who is portrayed as a Hispanic character that fights, chases women, and hotwires cars. Okay, so that's how you can kind of see that, the claim was that Latinx people are represented in a negative light. The evidence was their analysis of the character of Tito. Let me show you how you write an annotated bibliography entry. You've got the citation here, and then you've got 2 paragraphs here. The first paragraph talks about the thesis and the clue, what that looks like again, because you're going to actually need to do this 2 times for your annotated bibliography. It's not just about one claim and one piece of evidence, but you have to find 2 claims and pieces of evidence that you found compelling enough to put in your piece. So let's look at another one. Tobin et al. Claim that women are typically portrayed as helpless and in need of protection, domestic and likely to marry. And then the evidence of that are the whopping 11 films in their study, and then we've listed them, that show that how that theme is reinforced over and over again. Just in case you're curious, here's another example. Tobin et al. Claim that gay and lesbian characters are either non-existent or are seen as, regarded with disgust. And so they give you the examples of Lumiere kissing Cogsworth and the disgust that happens, or the main character in Mulan dressing as a boy and how people regard her with disgust for doing that, okay? So the first part of your annotated bibliography, in the first paragraph, all right, you are going to want to identify the thesis, all right? And then you're going to want to find one compelling claim that they're making and the evidence that they're using to back that up, and then a second claim that the authors are arguing and the evidence used to back that up, okay? So that is the first paragraph of an annotated bibliography entry, All right. And that's really the thing that's going to be potentially the most challenging for you, but it's really easy. And you want to keep in mind that you really want to find examples from the articles that are compelling to you, because remember that this is something that you're using to help you plan for assignment 3. So don't pick a source or an example that isn't going to help you, because that defeats the point. So the second paragraph right here, it's really about the question that it answers is, really about what did I take away from this? And how is this going to help my research, right? And so what you're really doing is you are connecting the dots between these claims and pieces of evidence here, and then how that helps you rethink your own, whatever it is that you're analyzing for assignment 3, okay? So let's take a look at that. So in this sample paper, they're analyzing an episode from The Owl House, which is a Disney cartoon, right? So let's look at how I'm connecting the dots here. So let us go to the first example here, okay? For example, not only does The Owl House avoid portraying Luz's Dominican American identity in a negative light, but they don't shy away from her Latinx identity, which is evident in Luz, the character's frequent use of Spanish terms of endearment when referring and talking to her mother, right? So that goes back to, that obviously connects back to that first claim about how Disney tends to represent Latinx people in negative and stereotypical lights. And the dot that we're connecting here is clearly The Owl House is doing something differently, right? So there has been a change in the last decade or so that the showrunners are getting things right, okay? Another example would be, connecting the dots between, with regard to gender, right? Luz is decidedly not helpless. Though she is in a mortal wizard's world, she learns how to use magic the hard way and never shies away from standing up for her wizard friends, right? And so that kind of goes back to this idea of, women are helpless and in need of protection. And here we're connecting the dots, like clearly this show is doing something differently, right? That is really noteworthy. So here, it's not as if I'm using this article to say that, oh, this is the same thing. It's to show how significant what the Owl House is doing, given what Disney tends to do, all right? And then look here, all right, this last example. It's also telling to me that the Owl House challenges queer erasure by featuring a bisexual main character, right? Of all orientations, bisexual characters are hardly ever represented. And it also seems striking that Amity and Luz are an interracial couple, one white lesbian wizard and another bi-Latina human, because Luz is a human, right? And that goes back to this point right here that in Disney films, Disney has tended to represent, either erase LGBT people or make them the butt of a joke. And so here we're saying, wow, this source has really helped me see in a different light just how important what the Owl House is doing, right? So it's not as if you're just looking at this as, oh, I have to find an example of this happening in the film that I'm analyzing. Sometimes it's like, wow, I know this pattern of what animated films tend to do when we're representing people, and this film is doing something super different than that, and that's really significant, okay? So that is how you do an annotated bibliography. The first paragraph is going to talk about their argument, their, one compelling claim and piece of evidence, another compelling claim and piece of evidence. You'll see here that obviously I have done a lot more claims and pieces of evidence, but that's because they were relevant to the piece that I want to analyze, right? And then that last paragraph is really connecting the dots between the examples that you're identifying here and saying, this is what this shows me. And in this case, what these examples up here show me is how different this stuff is, right? So how different it is that the Owl House is doing something that's not terribly awful, okay? So that, my friends, and then the second paragraph which is like really the third part, the third thing that you want to do is just talk about how this applies to your research, how it helps you see something in a different light. Okay?